Well, hello everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the latest HR Tech Chat episode, and we have a very interesting episode today. We have two folks from iCIMS with us to discuss their 2021 class, the class of 2021 report, which looks at some of the job-seeking behaviors and attitudes of of young people who are just graduating from college this year, which was actually last month, not this month, I believe, because we're already in June. So I want to welcome Rhea Moss, who is iCIMS Director of Data Insights and Customer Intelligence, and also Nicole Tucker, Manager of Talent Acquisition at iCIMS. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, this is going to be a super interesting conversation. We talked a little bit about this a couple of weeks ago before the melee of Memorial Day weekend and the official commencement of summer. And I didn't mean, no pun intended there. We're talking about the class of 2021. That pun was definitely not intended, but commencement ceremonies, have the newest, latest college grads looking for jobs, and you have a report here that's drawing on iCIMS' considerable amount of data, just looking what their attitudes are, what are their behaviors probably going to be. Rhea, let's start with you. We were talking about expectations. What Zoomers, I guess they're called Zoomers, Generation Z. I'm Generation X, we're the forgotten ones, but we don't have to talk about that. But Generation Z, the Zoomers, they have some expectations around hiring practices and talent acquisition and what they think they're going to experience when they look for a job. What's going on there?
Yeah, so great question. I think the first piece that I think is really fascinating that we found, and we look at the iCIMS system data to give people a sense of the scale we're talking about. There's about 120 million applications processed in last year during the pandemic in 2020, resulted in about 3.8 million hires, so pretty significant there. But what I think is really interesting about class of report is we also survey college students and we survey folks who recruit and hire college students. So I think we get to see this really interesting kind of side by side of what the seniors expect entering into the workforce and then what recruiters or companies are expecting as they bring them in. And one of the big call outs of sort of separate expectations right now was salary. There's a pretty significant jump right now in the salaries that we're seeing being offered to class of 2021, even from what was the class of 2020, those who did actually get hired from that class. It's a pretty significant, 22% increase year over year. I think that probably speaks a lot to the labor situation we're facing right now. But interestingly enough, there's about a $15,000 difference. So class of 2021, the seniors said they expected to make about $52,000, give or take, entering the workforce, whereas employers were expecting to pay about $66,000. That's a pretty significant gap that we're seeing just from a data perspective on, $15,000 on the table, especially when you start your career. That's a pretty significant number. Yeah. The other sort of place that we're not seeing great alignment between the class of and employers or the workforce, I'd say, and it's a very hot topic right now, is about do we work virtually? Do we work in an office? I know this is buzzing right now across the nightly news, right? You said that you're Gen X, right? I'll admit I'm a millennial, and to me, as a mom of two, working from home has had its positives, it's had its negatives. We could go into that. We probably do a whole nother webinar on that one. But I think in general, amongst most of us around our age grade, just the work from home or the flexibility is huge. I would say it's top of surveys. Everyone's saying this is big, whereas only 2% of college seniors said they wanted a full-time 0 days in the office position. And I think that that's a really interesting number as we think about it, to say, like, no, they want to go back. I think that that's a pretty significant gap between expectations as companies talk about everyone's going remote or they're not. How do we recruit this class?
Before we get to Nicole, because I want to get some feedback from you, Nicole, on what you're seeing from your perch there at iCIMS vis-a-vis what Rhea is talking about. But before we get to that, I'm really, really intrigued by this work from home thing. And my mind is churning here. I'm thinking, so, frankly, myself, work from home, that's great. It's so much more convenient. I have all these other things I need to do. Um, Pick up the girls from daycare, all sorts of things, uh, what do you think is driving? So they want to work, they want to be at the office. What's this all about?
So if I had to take a guess, and I love Rhea's input there as well. So if I had to take a guess, and I think it could be around, as you are starting your career, the opportunity to learn with individuals of, I would say the same class that you're coming into. So, when we think about early career individuals, we do try to hire, in a class model if we can, so that they're able to go through enablement and training together and, graduate, if you will, as they are starting their journey, sort of moving from that backpack to briefcase kind of experience. And when you think about, learning from peers, learning from your, inline manager, your subject matter experts, it's a little bit harder and, to do if you're just doing it on Zoom. It's very purposeful. You have to reach out to X person and say, hey, can I shadow you on this? Or, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Love to grab your time, hear your thoughts from that training we just did. Whereas if you're in the office, the opportunity to hear, others on the phone, see how other people are taking that project on, or even just saying, hey, neighbor, gut check, like, can you just look over my shoulder to make sure I'm doing this right? I know that we learned about this at today's training. So I think it's very much accomplished. It can be accomplished in a remote environment. We've hired many people, if you will, in a remote environment in the last 18 months or so, some of those who are recent graduates. But I do think that there's that opportunity or that want to have, a person that you can kind of, I don't want to say commiserate with, but like who's going through through the same experiences that you are, and have that sort of gut check, especially when you're earlier in your career. Not to say, as a professional with more experience than I probably want to admit, I am also, I would say, millennial cusp where, X, Y, depending upon who you're talking to. So more experience than I'd like to admit. I still have to, rely on my peers and, and gather employees together to say, we have to do some brain share here, because right now we can't hear everybody in the office, or even those that were remote prior to joining, like have an intentional conversation with them and the team for these types of opportunities. So it is much more intentional, but to, your point, Brent and Rhea, I also have 2 kids, and the opportunity for flexibility and I would say having an employer such as iCIMS respect that flexibility model is vital to, my continued success, my team's continued success. I just feel, and again, I don't want to overstate or overstep what somebody who's just graduating may feel, but it is, they have gone through this whole learning experience at school up until last year, most likely in person. And now you're saying this very big event where you are now stepping into that first employer's office is going to be virtual. It doesn't feel as, hey, who am I going to be working with? Like, where are the bathrooms again? Like, where's the best place to eat? You don't get that as much. So I'll pause. I don't know, Rhea, if you wanted to step in as well, or Brent, you had a follow up to that.
I mean, I'll just say one thing too, to remember, I always try to put myself kind of in their shoes, and it's impossible this year because none of us went through what this class went through. But they got a lot taken away from them, right? So if we think about class of 2021, their junior year wasn't, definitely not what anybody expected. Their senior year, I mean, depending on the college or whatnot, they may have gotten some semblance of a senior year, but nothing like any of the rest of us had of our senior. I mean, really think back on your senior year of college. It was a very fun time in life. Yeah. They may not have even gotten a graduation. They definitely didn't probably get their junior year internships, which normally turn into full-time positions where they already have those relationships built in a company, or they know what to expect, or they've got that experience and that comfort level to say, I'll be frank, when we went remote, and I'll be like Nicole and admit I'm more years into my career than I really want to calculate it. For me, it was uncomfortable to figure out how to navigate this. And how do I have my first session with my mentor, who I know and have known in person, but the first time on Zoom, it was a little awkward, to be honest. And I didn't know how to have certain situations with my employees that we would normally have in a face-to-face one-to-one, that I had to call them on the phone or the Zoom call and have. We all felt that uncomfort. And we were in positions where we had already been there in a pre-pandemic world. So you think of this poor class, right? They didn't really get their junior year. They didn't get their internships. They didn't get a normal senior year of college. Maybe they got something. Again, graduations, all of those sort of like life milestones were either taken away or were very, very different looking than previous classes. And now you add, this is like the last, really, you start your career, this is your last big, I remember my first day of work, right? And I was so excited. My mom took me shopping and I bought suits. And now I'm like, oh gosh, please don't make me wear a suit. But that was like, I did it. I graduated college. I'm a grown up now. This is my next thing. I work in corporate America, and things now that I'm like, oh, I have a happy hour after work, right? At the time, that was huge. I was going to get to meet leaders face to face, and they want that experience. They've had so many of these other experiences, I think, taken away from them, and they've had to do college via Zoom or graduation via Zoom or internships, that now this is an opportunity that they're saying, I want what everybody else got, is, frankly, one of the things that I think leads to that. Now they're okay with some flexibility. It's not to say they want 5 days a week, 40 plus hours in person, but they aren't sort of leaning in the camp of wanting to be completely remote, sort of void of any, three-dimensional interaction.
It's a rite of passage. I mean, it's a huge rite of passage, and there's a, getting back to expectations, there's an expectation of what it's going to be like in it. And you're right. What's the next big event after this? They can rent a car when they're 25 or something like that, which nobody remembers that one. But in any event, when you described what their senior year has been like, all this, I honestly, no joke, I felt sad. I felt sad for them. I felt it hadn't really dawned on me, the totality of it all, until just now, because we've all been like, we got power through, we can do it, or can do, which is all great, but now really reflecting back, I mean, these people were really robbed of some major things in their lives. I mean, first world problems, I guess, but at the same time, hey, we all want to be first world. Not to get too philosophical. One thing that's really interesting to me is this emerging, what I'm hearing is this emerging really hybrid environment, hybrid working environment, where there, where do you think that's going? We're kind of veering off the path a little bit of the report, but I think it's related. So this is kind of a two-part question. Do you think we're moving sort of permanently to a hybrid scenario in work? A, and B, whether we are permanently or just for the time being, for a few years or whatnot, how can technology, talent acquisition technology, and internal talent acquisition technology, like internal hiring and all that, how can that help? How can that, what's the best sort of, what's the best setup for your technology around that?
So I'll take A, maybe we'll give B to Nicole.
Sure.
I think we were always headed towards this more hybrid, more flexible, direction. I think the pandemic incredibly escalated the pace in which we were getting there. And I think that where employers, employees, different businesses, I think, certain industries were more apprehensive. Certain industries were starting to do it more and more. Like we already saw some companies doing this already when you think of kind of Silicon Valley and tech, especially. And then you had some of the older, more established industries, I will say, that were a bit more apprehensive. And I think that what the pandemic did is it caused everybody who wasn't just a complete essential business to just figure it out. And there was no more pushback of, well, it's always been this way, because it could not be that way last year. And I think while it's not, the pendulum swung very far one way, I don't think it's going to swing all the way back, but it takes that excuse off the table of, well, I don't know, how would we do it if somebody wasn't in our office? Well, we all weren't in our office for the last 18 months and we figured it out. We did it, right? So I think that from now on, and I remember having conversations, Nicole and I work closely in recruiting, and we used to recruit some really, really hard to fill roles. And we'd have conversation of, well, I know most of the team is in New Jersey, but could we go and find, there's only so many people that do XYZ. Can we hire them anywhere? And it was like, we could, but I don't need to be the first time. And no one wants to be the first time, right? Now that's totally off the table. It's like, we've done that and it went fine. The world kept turning, the business kept going. We're clearly capable of the technologies there, the systems are there. We're all used to it now. And I also think there's a level of empathy where I want to go back to the office a good amount of time, but I now have empathy to that person who won't be there. And the next time we're on a Zoom call, but some of us are in person, it's not going to be, oh, don't forget there's someone on camera. I think we're all kind of wired now to feel for that, for those people. But I do think we will be going back to some sort of hybrid, and I'll draw back to the class of 2021 kind of conversation. It'll be really interesting because you have these different generations and you really have kind of the older millennial generation managing now. And you have that they may be managing these Gen Zs, and whereas they value so much this flexibility and not having to be physically there, but we're finding the class of and this younger generation wanting that FaceTime. So I think it's a little bit of a call to action to not just TA and HR departments, but to managers across the business to say, this is something you should know these people want, because if you want to make them, feel included, be successful, advance in our business, that you as mentors and leaders need to kind of keep in mind their desires are very, very different than my own or our own collectively.
Yeah. There's some interesting things around that. So getting back, this is perfect segue to the technology piece of the question, right? That we've all heard of this, and I forget who came up with it, but this is the bell curve, where the technology adoption bell curve, and the early adopters, there are several deviations, and it's actually over here, but so you guys, it'll look like this, way over, the early adopters, right? And then you have the others that kind of come in next, and you have the laggards or whatever. Okay, so everyone became, we had the early adopters, but because of the pandemic, everyone was forced into being the next batch of adopters, and a lot of people, they weren't happy about it, but they did it because they had to. And you could probably argue that a lot of them figured, hey, this wasn't so bad, we were able to make it happen, and some of them just, will ditch, ditch a smartphone and go back to the flip phone. There'll be those people, right? But then a lot of them will just be like, yeah, it's a happy medium. I think that's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Really exciting. I like to say that 2020 was a wormhole. And I'm not a Star Trek nerd, but for some reason I know what a wormhole is. But yeah, we're so much closer to the future of work now than we thought we'd be by now, a year and a half ago. It's really crazy.
Well, I think it will also be interesting though to watch how that has to catch back up. So I think the other thing to kind of keep in mind is we made all these changes with everyone, at least for our own business, right? With everyone completely remote. Well, now that we go back to hybrid, there's a whole nother set of changes of how do these two worlds we had, I love your wormhole reference, how do those two worlds now collide when some people are in an office, some people are not in an office? How do we now navigate this sort of third tier, which is a little bit of both?
Right. Are we in some, not to take the metaphor too far, but are we in some hyperspace time travel mode where we rematerialize too soon and half our bodies are, fused with the like a building or something? And not to go too far but Nicole, let's get back to HR technology here, talent acquisition technology. How do you think the technology can help to facilitate this hybrid work environment that's clearly emerging?
Yeah, of course. So I think it really does go to technology in its essence is to elevate what you've already been doing, and really elevate process, elevate experience. And when you think about the HR technology space, it truly is about how are you allowing for the human behind the technology to get more in front and automate or elevate things to make it more seamless on the back end, so that again, you're spending more time on those value added conversations. You're spending more time putting your organization at I would say at the forefront with respect to what candidates or prospective employees are being able to digest and see. So when I think about the talent attraction strategy and how it's really taken, I would say light years, if you're still using the metaphor or not, but it's really gone light years in the last couple of years with respect to what candidates are asking for and how much more information they're getting upfront before talking to a person, so that a person's spending less time on some of the, I would say, facts and figures, and more time getting to know the person and ensuring that they would be that right person at that right time with the right opportunity. I'll give you an example. So right now, video is huge. Our video studio tool, we've started to incorporate in a number of different areas of our process. And part of that is about allowing for future employees, candidates, to see who they be working with. You talk about how are these technologies elevating those experiences? Again, continued engagement, whether it's a person applying to a role today, or if they've applied, being able to engage with them. You mentioned text. We use text throughout the process. I remember during new hire meetings, people would mention that to get a text from the recruiter just to say, hey, just want to make sure you didn't have any questions before you talk to this hiring manager. So excited to hear back from you. And again, it's about that continued engagement model, because it is not always just about an A to B type of process. It may be A, B, C to Z before that person ends up joining your business. But every touch point you're having is about how are you elevating that experience. So I think these tools and technologies are amplifying that. And when you think about tools on the back end where candidates may not see it, thinking of some of the AI functionality, some of the features, again, it really does go back to how are you building products to, again, raise the bar from bringing the human back into the process, at least from an HR perspective. Rhea, yourself. I don't know if you have anything to add there.
I just think that the other thing to look at the last year and a half is just how fast things changed, and how, I don't want to say pandemic because it has nothing to do with COVID, but 2019 and prior, things like career sites, for example, or your EVP didn't change that often, right? You rebranded your career site about as often as you rebranded your company, because they're really, every so many years, right? You change little bits in here and there, and maybe some words as benefits shift a bit, but there really wasn't drastic change in how you as a business present yourself. And I think over the last year and a half, it feels like every 3 or 4 months, we need to significantly shift, for example, when we're going through, Q2, Q3 of last year, all of a sudden messaging around like stability, longevity of your business became critical, because that's what became attractive to applicants. I have conversations with a lot of our customers who are in essential business where they say on a regular basis, we need to change the messaging, the imagery on our site, because, you can't in 2021 have a career site that doesn't have masks on. But now we're getting into a place where if you're not using masks in your workforce anymore, well, then do we need to get new images up that don't have them? And, what is it like to work at your business is shifting all the time. And as we think about things like, well, again, I'm tying us back to class of 2021. As we think about attracting them, well, the career site, the messaging we would have built as a business is, we're remote but together, even just 3 months ago. Well, now we're starting to open our offices back up. So we need to be attractive to the older talent and say, you have the flexibility, but we also need that messaging out there to the younger talent that says it now is, we know class of 2021 wants to go work in an office. So how do we get a testimonial up about how nice it is to be back in the office? And how do we do that without having to call an agency or our marketing department or software engineers to build a website? I think the tools and the tech and things like Video Studio and our career sites products actually enable the actual TA teams to say Nicole and her team can go make changes in our message without needing, a 6-month turnaround time. Because right now it's like, if you did it 6 months ago, you'd have done it completely different than what we're doing today, right?
Yeah, so much to unpack right now between what both of you said. So, and I'm not going to attempt to unpack it all, but a couple things that come out here's one common denominator or theme. I think I got to thinking about this is that, technology, it's really about facilitating communication. That's really what it is. It's all about the communication, facilitating a high frequency of communication and a high caliber of, quality of that communication. Those two things are paramount. And if the extent that your technology can support those, the better off you are. And what also occurred to me, though, is that it's that pace of communication is partially driven by this sort of, hyper a news cycle that we're in right now. It's that to me is there's this sort of macro constantly changing, what we would call the ecosystem that we're living in, right? It's changing and it's affecting everyone. And so it's necessitating agility. That's what I was trying to get at, is agility. So organizations, they need agility too. So you need technology that's going to handle a high frequency and a high quality and caliber of communication, and also that supports your agility as an organization. So to me, that seems to be the essence of where technology intersects with all of this. And that's huge. That's super huge. I want to just let's switch gears a little bit here, getting back into the report a little bit more. I know we've talked about quite a bit about work from home and Zoomers' expectations, or what their desire is in that regard. What are some of the other findings from this report that really, really struck you?
So I think one of the big ones that, and I've loved Nicole's kind of thoughts from being sort of on the ground doing this, but I think one of the big ones, again, with the difference between companies and Gen Z, and this one was really surprising to me, frankly, is that 97% of HR departments plan to keep using video tools to hire at least through the next 12 months. Again, going back to our conversation of, do we think it's going to swing the pendulum all the way back? But to me, that stat says no. But what's really interesting is that 80% of college graduates believe that they actually present themselves better in person than on video. And that's one of those where I think I kind of stepped back and I was like, wait, this is the TikTok generation. And this is, they FaceTime, this is a very natively video generation. Like, that's their comfort zone, in the way that, maybe my generation was a little more phone call or text, right? But I think one of the things that, as I, again, kind of have to step back and try to put myself in their shoes to think about, is they use those technologies socially, and they're learning, or they're uncomfortable with how to use those same technologies or skills professionally. Whereas I really only use these technologies professionally. I have to be honest, I don't, really FaceTime or Zoom my friends. So they're a little bit uncomfortable in knowing what are the different behaviors, and what are, how do I show corporate self via FaceTime, via video interview, via recorded video of myself, as opposed to how I might do it on a social media type engagement. And these are all pause and go to Nicole, because I know you're, speaking with these folks every single day. Are you seeing that from our side?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a fair point when you're trying to separate how you use technology in your non-working life versus your working life. And for those that are just entering the workforce, and if you're talking about the class of 2021 who may not have actually had an internship, this may in fact be their first time dealing in a sort of corporate setting. So I think part of the opportunity, at least from a talent acquisition professional perspective, is to provide comfort and ensure that, we recognize some of these tools and technologies may not be what you use on a day-to-day basis, which is where we may start. Did you want to start with just a phone call, and then we can move to video call, and being able to provide that level of comfort, so that individuals feel they can bring their best selves to those interview processes. And I will share, and again, this was when we were back in an office situation, and not last year, but I remember our early career recruiters talking about they don't want to do even phone calls. They want to do a texting, like anytime they get no phone calls, no texting. They just want to, have their work speak for themselves. And again, this was a couple of years ago when you're talking about interviewing for internships. And really it was that in-person, on campus interview that they thought that that's where you'd shine. So now that you saw my resume, now that we've kind of gone through that first round, I want to shine in person, so that I can, get feedback. And I think that that's, critical, that a lot of individuals know, especially those entering the workforce. It's more of, what can I do better? So even if it doesn't go well, now that you're telling me, hey, with video, you may want to consider backing up, or, hey, I know that this can be stressful. Like, let's just ease into the conversation a little bit to get you a little bit more acclimated until we start going into the harder questions, or give you, that 2-minute prep time to get your bearings, if you will, until we start getting into more of the conversation to understand what you're looking to do. But I do feel at that earlier career side, because you haven't necessarily defined the path that you're on, there's a lot of opportunity to, say, have you thought about X role? You display these soft skills, you display these digitally advanced skills. I know you're positioning yourself for this role, but had you thought about this role? And I know here at iCIMS, we've had a lot of great success sort of suggesting, opportunities that somebody may not have applied to, saying, hey, as a recruiter, my job is to find the right role and make sure that you are excited by it and make sure that those motivations align. And I know you applied to X, and that could be because you applied knowing with what you have or what information you have on hand. But had you thought about a career in sales? You talk about, retail, you talk about these things. So again, I think that there's opportunities to really bring that human back into the process and use some of these I would say some of these tooling that you're talking about to really enhance that conversation or enhance what they know already before they even get to you. Is that helpful? I don't know if I went off on a different tangent, but
It's all helpful. That's great stuff. That gets me back to, that gets us back to AI a little bit, right? So there could be some natural language processing built into the employee or into the communication technology, right? And it captures, and maybe it's able to suss out some of the soft skills that an employee may not know, may not be aware that they would be a good salesperson, for instance, right? We're kind of, we're getting into that bleeding edge stuff, but I think that's super interesting. One thing is around video technology. So first of all, around technology in general, and what the Zoomers want to do in the professional setting, and I think it was interesting, this idea that they see it as more of an old school non-tech environment, or they want to present themselves in person and all this, or maybe they see it. I have to unpack that. All sorts of things come to mind. I have all sorts of, sort of ideas around that, why that might be so. But I would have thought that it would be. So I was just as surprised as you folks were, by that, because I would have thought that there'd be a real fluidity there. Like they just want to use the texting for everything, right? Or the video for everything, right? So that was very surprising to me. But I would imagine a lot of organizations would want to use video, continue using video technology in their recruiting efforts, especially at the beginning stages of the recruiting process. They don't necessarily want to pay to fly somebody in, or all this sort of stuff. Or maybe there's somebody who it's just easier for them to do that initial screen via video as opposed to in person. Maybe there's a logistical rationale that makes sense and whatnot, and it's a real money saver, I think, for hiring organizations. So
It's
I,
also, if I could pause, it's also not just a money saver as in like dollars on the books right now, but it's a time saver. So I can think of, Nicole doesn't know I'm gonna bring this up, but Nicole is actually the person who recruited and convinced me to come to iCIMS. She was fantastic.
awesome.
And I remember my interview process. Now I've been at iCIMS for almost 5 years now. But I remember Nicole reaching out to me day after an interview and saying, hey, that went really well. We have a couple more people we'd like you to meet with. The next time they're all going to be in the office together is 3 weeks from now. So in 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to have you back in for another onsite. And I wasn't in a hurry, so like that was all fine. But with the labor shortages we're having right now, and the fact that candidates that are actively looking are getting multiple offers very quickly, In that same world now, I might have had 3 other companies that made me an offer in those 3 weeks while we waited for the schedule to work out for me to come on site and meet 3 executives. And now with the ability to do video, it could have been 2 of them are going to be on site and one's going to be a Zoom call, and we can get you in tomorrow. Right. And I'm sure Nicole has found scheduling. I'm sure her scheduling life has gotten a lot easier when it's able to just look at a calendar block. And if you need to meet with 3 people, it doesn't need, because they're not in person, it doesn't need to be back to back to back. It's okay if there's a half hour, an hour gap where when you've got a lot of tight calendars to deal with. And we have just across the board, across almost every single industry, time to fill is significantly declined. And that using these tools are helping employers that are finding talent and helping them sort of land and lock them in kind of faster than ever. So you save dollars as in, travel budgets and that kind of thing, but there's also dollars saved as in, how much does an empty seat cost you for those week or 2 extra of time to fill?
Well, yeah, I mean, we did a case study earlier this year. It was affordable housing management company, and they span across, I think 13 states. They're huge in terms of their geographic footprint. Kind of just a sort of a right on the cusp of a very small, medium-sized organization versus a very large, small organization. But they really leveraged video technology for recruiting. The person who started there, she started in her role leading HR the day that the lockdowns began in the state where their headquarters are. And so immediately, this is actually really interesting. She asked to have communicate internal comms rolled into her role as well. And so she did all of that together. And that was something that really helped them to decrease time to fill during, a very disruptive time and all these sorts of things. So it was super interesting. And so to me, it just seems that this stuff is, well, it goes right back to agility and flexibility. So it's technology again, making and enabling the organization to be agile. Great stuff. Super, super interesting report. The class of 2021 report by iCIMS, available at the website for download. Thank you so much for being our guests here on HR Tech Chat. This has been a very illuminating conversation. Really good stuff in that report. I think we have a lot to think about as we get to the next normal following the last year and a half.
I like that, the next normal. And it's not new anymore and it's not normal. So
Yeah, that's right. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.